Vegan Cooking Odyssey class. This is Derek again, and today I'm making a breakfast recipe. This is my go-to tofu scramble when I really want a savory breakfast instead of something sweet. This is a tofu scramble, and we're also going to serve it with some smoky tempeh, almost like bacon. So in some ways this recipe is about replacing a dairy or an egg-based breakfast. This is going to be a lot like scrambled eggs, even though it is going to have its own flavor too. We're going to mix the scrambled tofu with some sauces and spices. You can also do this with just spices, but I think it adds something to use some sauces as well. And we're going to add some diced vegetables too, as well as some greens. There's only a few ingredients for this recipe, and it doesn't take too long to come together, which I love. And as you can imagine, it's very versatile. You can serve it with whatever you have on hand and with whatever extras you'd like. So some things that we will need: we're going to need olive oil, salt and pepper for sure. We're going to need a diced onion. I have a yellow onion here, a clove of garlic. We're going to use tofu. You want to use extra firm tofu or super firm tofu in this recipe. Just one block that you find at the supermarket. I have our tempeh here, which has been marinating overnight. I'll show a bit about that process in a moment. To get that really savory, almost egg-like quality on the tofu, we're going to need a few things. We're going to need Dijon mustard, tamari, which adds so much flavor and saltiness, some ground turmeric, some tahini, ground sesame seeds. Those are going to combine together to make a really nice sauce to add to the tofu. Then for our vegetables, you need 2 cups of diced vegetables, whatever you might have on hand. This recipe does come from Gena Hamshaw, again, from Food 52 Vegan. It's page 16. She says to use 2 cups of diced vegetables, and she recommends a bell pepper and zucchini, which I think is perfect, so I'm just going to use that myself today. And in addition to that, towards the end we're going to add a green. I'm going to do some baby spinach. You could do kale. You could maybe do something like arugula or watercress too, but spinach I think is perfect. And then we're going to finish with some nice parsley. A final note too, to get some extra savoriness in this recipe, we're going to use some nutritional yeast right towards the end. And then you can serve this with some other extras if you'd like to. I'm going to top mine with some sliced avocado. You can have some toast. You can have some tomatoes. Anything you might like to have. But we'll get started. There's a few things we have to do right away before we start sauteing. Good evening, class. It is the night before I'm going to make my tofu scramble with tempeh bacon. I'd like to have it tomorrow for breakfast. If you have time the night before, which I currently do, it is really great if you can get a head start on marinating the tempeh so that it has as much flavor as possible when you either bake it or fry it tomorrow. So, we just need a few ingredients for this. This is also from Gena Hamshaw's Food 52 Vegan. She calls it her smoky tempeh. It does taste a lot like bacon. Doesn't quite taste like bacon, but it has the smokiness. It has a similar texture. It's something tempeh in particular is really good at. Again, we're going to talk about in class. Here's what tempeh almost always looks like in a container like this. Tempeh is an Indonesian soy product. It's made from a fermented kind of soy mash. So it's often compared to tofu, but the texture is totally different. They're both made from soy, but this has a much harder texture, and it's perfect for something like this. So it'll come in this plastic package with scissors or a sharp blade. You can kind of cut it open and slowly get this nice rectangular block out. We do want to be a little delicate. We don't want to crush it because it is a little pliant, and we we don't want it to fall apart. Okay, so we got both layers of plastic off. And you can see that's what our tempeh looks like. You might see a few little black spots or gray spots, and that's totally fine. It's not mold. It just means it's not quite as fresh as it used to be, but it's still perfectly fine for our purposes. Okay, so there's a few ways you can do this. Often tempeh will be diced or cut into strips, sometimes longer strips or shorter strips. For a recipe like this, we want 1/4 inch strips. So I will usually just go right down this way, trying to be pretty thin. Something like that is about what we're looking for. Certainly no thinner than that, I would say. And we'll probably get somewhere between 15 and 20 of those slices out of this block. This is 8 ounces of tofu, I should mention. They're pretty much only sold in 8 ounces. Okay, great. So now we do want to get our marinade together, and then we're going to put it in just this shallow Tupperware with a nice large flat surface that we can lay all of our strips hopefully on. Maybe not one layer, but certainly no more than 2. So let's get the marinade together. Okay, so we'll start on our marinade. The principal ingredient in the marinade, which is going to provide so much of that smokiness, that umami, and especially the salt, is one of our vegan superstars, tamari. Tamari, I think, has an extra layer of umami to it, whether it has gluten in it or not. This is organic, this doesn't have gluten. But it's really helpful to get the salt, especially, and that smokiness in there, too. It just adds so much flavor to things, sometimes almost invisibly, but in this case it's going to be the main ingredient in the marinade, so it'll be very flavor forward. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons, and I'm just going to put these into a small glass bowl or measuring cup. You could use a measuring cup. We'll measure out 2. Already so much flavor already, I can already smell. We're also going to add, to get a good balance here, we're going to add some apple cider vinegar, which is going to give it some acidity. Just 1 tablespoon. We also need some sweetness here to balance things out. So we're going to use our agave syrup once again. We're going to use a tablespoon of agave syrup. You could use maple syrup too if you'd like. And once again, agave also has the benefit of being so sticky that it can bind the marinade together as well and keep it from being too watery. And our final 2 ingredients, we're going to use a teaspoon of olive oil to get a little bit of fat in there. And then just a teaspoon of a smoked paprika, or any paprika that you have. But again, smoked is pretty good when we're looking for smoky tempeh. Great. I'm going to give that a quick stir with a spoon. And you can see it's got this lovely maroonish brown, dark red color. And we want to just get that all broken up. Some of the paprika is still clumpy. It already smells really, really good. Okay. And now we're basically done. I'm going to get my small Tupperware here. I'm going to add the tempeh. We'll do as much as we can in one layer. I think we're going to have a little bit peeking over, and that's totally fine. And now I'm just going to pour the marinade right over. And you really, before you say goodnight to your tempeh, you really want to make sure every surface gets a nice coating of the marinade. And then I'll put the lid on. And now I'll be a little more vigorous in how I mix it up. Definitely don't want to damage the tempeh, but in this case I can get a pretty good coating if I shake it around. And if you happen to do this, it's recommended that you marinate for 3 hours to overnight. If you happen to be doing this during the day, feel free to check on your tempeh in hourly or several hourly intervals and just give it a little shake or stir it around. Make sure that those flavors are seeping in. And now we're done. I'm just going to put this in the fridge and we will deal with it tomorrow morning. We'll give it a nice cook with our tofu scramble and we'll have a lovely vegan breakfast. Before we start any further prep for this recipe, there's a few things we want to do right away. First of all, our tempeh, our smoky tempeh, which has been marinating overnight, you can do 3 to 8 hours. I'm gonna bake this today. You could also fry it in a nice skillet or cast iron skillet, but baking is, I think, really easy and it comes out really nice. It doesn't fall apart too much. So I'm gonna preheat my oven to 350 for that. These strips are pretty thin, so you don't want the heat too high. And then I'm just going to put it in this little baking tray with parchment paper on it in just a moment. The other thing we need to do is for our tofu. We want to prepare our tofu, and you might want to go over a sink real quick. You're going to make just an incision with your knife, ideally right about here, so you're not puncturing the tofu, but you're still getting through to this, getting through the packaging. There's a whole bunch of water in here. Tofu has to be preserved in water. So you can see I'm just going to make a gentle cut like that, and it'll start draining out. And maybe I'll give it a few light squeezes. But our tofu, especially a firm or an extra firm tofu like this, has a lot of water inside. And the more of that water you can get out before you start cooking, the better. It'll absorb more flavor and the texture will be much nicer. So to that end, I'm just going to peel this back. There's our block of tofu. I'm going to put it on this plate here. There it is. Again, it is a little fragile, so be a little careful, but this looks good. And to squeeze that water out, we're just going to put some heavy weights on top. I have just a 28 ounces of diced tomatoes, a nice can like that, or beans, or whatever you might have that has some significant weight to it. Just give it a little squeeze, and then we're just going to leave it. We're going to put it aside for maybe 10 minutes or so until we're ready to start. So then, with those waiting, we will start prepping our vegetables, and then in just a few minutes we'll be ready to start sauteing. Okay, so, our oven has preheated. Our tofu continues to be squeezed and is releasing quite a bit of water, which is great. I've just done some prep. I diced I had two small onions. You want about a cup or so. This might be a little bit more, but that's still great. I diced those onions. I minced that 1 clove of garlic, and then I just diced the bell pepper and zucchini. Again, whatever vegetables you'd like to use. I'm just going to put those aside for now. In a large skillet, I've just turned on the heat. I'm going to add a tablespoon of olive oil. Give that a moment to warm up. We're going to put the onions in first. In the meantime, our marinated tempeh is here on the tray, and I'm going to put that in the oven. For now, I'll set the timer for 15. It's probably going to take 25 to 30 minutes, but it's optimal if after 15 minutes you can check on them and flip them. Okay, so that's going. The skillet's getting hot. See if it's just about there. Again, I'm just going to put a little bit in, see what the sound's like, and if it's really starting to sizzle, then I'll continue. But otherwise, you can see not quite there yet, so I'll wait a little longer for it to get to temperature. All right, the little bit of onion we added is now sizzling. I'm going to add the rest of the onion. And we'll give that a nice coat in the olive oil. And then we're just going to soften that for probably about 5 to 6 minutes. Again, it'll depend on your skillet, on how much onion you're using, on your stove. So just keep an eye on it, make sure it's not burning, give it a little stir every now and then. And in the meantime, if you haven't finished prepping some of those vegetables, I would work on that. Now is also a good time for us to get our sauce together. So while our onion's cooking down, I am going to combine our 4 sort of pantry ingredients together. That's going to give it almost an egg-like quality, certainly a very umami quality. For that, we're going to start with 2 tablespoons of our tahini, and try to get as much of the actual tahini as you can and less of the water. And we're just going to do this in a small bowl or measuring cup. So there's 2 tablespoons of that, 1 tablespoon of tamari. Again, the tamari is going to add a lot of umami as well as salt. We're going to do a tablespoon of Dijon mustard, and just to keep it clean, I'm going to use a different spoon here. This is going to add a lot of sharp flavor to it. That's about a tablespoon. And then finally, just a ½ teaspoon of ground turmeric. Okay. And then we're just going to whisk that up. It'll turn a nice yellow color, mostly from the turmeric. Ideally your tahini breaks down pretty quick. Hopefully it's not too cold or anything. And that looks pretty good. You might need to add a little bit more water if it's kind of thick, but it's all good. It's just going to go in the pan, so we'll leave that aside for now. In the meantime, our onion continues to cook down, needs a few more minutes. So we'll give it a few more minutes and then we'll add the garlic. Okay, so it's been about 6 minutes and our onion is tender. It's starting to burn a little bit. You can see it's getting translucent in places as well. Now is a good time to add the garlic. And like with any sauteing of garlic and onion, we'll probably give this about 30 seconds to a minute. Definitely stirring so that doesn't burn. Okay, and then our next step is to add our diced vegetables. And the recipe says to just add them and cook until tender. That could mean a lot of things depending on what vegetables you're using. I generally find if I'm using bell pepper and zucchini, it takes about 5 minutes again. So we're going to add those to the skillet now, and we'll let those cook down. These are going to release some water, especially the zucchini. Which will help deglaze a bit. But if your pan does start feeling a little dry, feel free to add some water yourself or a little bit more oil. Oh, and make sure the heat's in a good place so you're hearing this sound. So I'm just going to mix it up and then just keep an eye on it for the next 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, so it's been 15 minutes, my timer went off. I'm checking on the tempeh. I'm going to give it a quick flip, the best we can do. This is looking great so far. And let's see. All right, some of those weren't perfect. It's okay. That's looking nice. And I'll get those. Okay, I'll put this back in for 10 minutes. We'll check on it then. It might need a little bit more time, but this could burn, so we want to be careful. In the meantime, our squash and our bell pepper have cooked down, and they've released just about all the water they had in them. So this is looking like it's ready to move to the next step. So the next step is going to be to add this yellow paste we made. We're going to add that right to the skillet, all of it. This is pretty viscous, actually. You might want to add some water, but it's not going to make a huge difference. Okay. And I'm going to give that a quick stir before we move on. Don't have to be too crazy right now, because our next step is to add the tofu. So, over here you can see a bunch of the water has been squeezed out. I'm going to quickly just go to the sink. Oop. Dump that out. And now I'm going to add just this whole block right to the skillet. And with my wooden spoon or whatever utensil you have, I'm just going to break it all up. Break it up until it's, you know, you don't see any block-like pieces. Definitely as bite-sized as possible. And then the other thing you want to be doing is you want to be stirring it around. So you can see the tofu is white, but we want it to be entirely yellow by the time we're done. So make sure it picks up all that flavor and color from that sauce we added. And I actually think extra firm is really great for this. I've tried doing this with super firm tofu, which is even harder than this, and it's kind of a strain to do this part. So I think extra firm is pretty perfect. But certainly we want it to have that springiness. We want it to stay together to some degree. So I wouldn't go to firm, or definitely not silken or anything like that. Alright, so you can see it's the side, I'm crumbling it pretty well, and then it's also picking up all that yellow color. You don't want to see any white tofu. And for this part, we're going to give it about 4 minutes. The tofu doesn't need to be cooked through per se, but just cooking it and exposing it to the heat will add to its flavor. So we're just going to give it a moment to really marry with the flavors, and I'll keep stirring and keep breaking up a little bit longer. But we'll check on it in 4 minutes. Our tofu's been cooking for about 4 minutes. It's definitely heated through. You can see it's married with those flavors really nicely. It's nestled in with all the vegetables. We're just about done. We just have a few last minute touches to add. Starting with nutritional yeast, which again is one of our ingredients that kind of a super ingredient. It's going to add so much cheesiness and flavor and kind of like a salty umami to it. In this case, it's definitely going to act somewhat like cheese. We're going to add a whole 1/4 cup of it. If you can add more if you'd like, you can add less. But we're just going to stir it in to add another layer of flavor. And we do, again, you want to look at the granules and you want to just see it dissolve. So it's got that pale yellow, and we just want to see all that color go away. It's going to be broken down by the heat. So we'll give it a few good stirs like that. And then our next thing to add is our greens, which again, this can be spinach, it can be kale, it can be chard, maybe something else like arugula or watercress. We're gonna add about 3 cups of it. I have this baby spinach here. You don't have to really be crazy about measuring it. I'm just gonna do maybe 2 or 3 handfuls. It's gonna really cook down, so don't be alarmed by the size. We'll stir it in there. And this is probably gonna take about 2 to 3 minutes. So be right back. Okay, so we are finished with our recipe. I'm just gonna plate it real quick. The spinach took about 2 to 3 minutes, and you can see it's all nice and wilted inside there. I turned off the heat on the skillet, and then just on my plate, I'm gonna add a few heaps of this. I like to serve this with all kinds of other things, so I made just some tiny little pieces of toast there from an old baguette. Okay. On top of that, we're going to add some chopped fresh parsley, a few twists of black pepper, and then I sliced up a little bit of avocado, so I'm going to add a little bit of that right on top. And also, our smoky tempeh is finished. That took about 10 more minutes in the oven. Maybe could have gone a little bit longer if you'd like, but this is totally done. This is great. So I'll just add a few of those there on the side. And yeah, we are all ready to eat. Enjoy our nice brunch. Feel free to add tomato or anything else you might like. But enjoy.